To President Lincoln, I have the pleasure of sending you this first dispatch ever telegraphed from an aerial station. At this moment, Professor T.S.C. Lowe was 500 feet above the White House in a basket under a hydrogen-filled balloon. More than 160 years later, the telegraph is dead. And the Zeppelins? They are back in service and needed on the battlefield in Ukraine. But what missions are they capable of performing? Do you remember when the Chinese aerostat entered US airspace? Although it was eventually shot down, it managed to stay for several hours over Malmstrom Base, Montana, where the United States has 150 missile silos with intercontinental ballistic missiles. Was its presence there a coincidence? No. Here is the route of the Chinese balloon. That is, the apparatus did not rely on a tailwind. Pentagon spokesperson Major General Patrick Ryder said, "We know this is a Chinese reconnaissance balloon and that it can maneuver." In other words, the balloon was performing the mission of a spy drone. But why use aerostat systems when satellites constantly hover over the Earth? The fact is that surveillance satellites fly in orbits hundreds of miles high and will only observe a particular area of the Earth's surface for a few seconds. At the same time, aerostat systems at 10 to 12 miles have a much higher accuracy because they can spend hours, days, or even weeks above an object obtaining valuable data. In addition, balloons are much cheaper than satellites, which require rockets to reach their orbit. Therefore, for the same amount of money as a satellite, you can buy a huge number of balloons. They're so cheap that the Russian army uses them as decoys. A representative of the Ukrainian Air Force said that Russia is launching balloons with radar angle reflectors. These balloons exhaust the Ukrainian air defense system and force it to use scarce missiles because they look like drones or missiles on the radar screen. Ukraine does not have advanced aerostat systems, but Ukraine's main ally, the United States, does. For example, the United States operates the Tethered Aerostat Radar System, TARS. These are large fabric balloons filled with helium that hover in the air at an altitude of 15,000 feet. They are held in place by a tether that ties to the ground. It's as simple as that. In fact, the trick is not in the Zeppelin, but the equipment that can be installed on this platform. This giant can lift up to 2,200 pounds of equipment. In such a package, they can detect a wide range of objects, including missiles, airplanes, drones, and ships. This is exactly what Ukrainian air defense needs. But is there any chance of getting them? In February 2024, the US State Department approved the sale of TARS to foreign partners. Poland will be the first country to receive TARS. Is Ukraine next? Give us a thumbs up if you've already imagined Putin's reaction. To do so with a relatively inexpensive balloon is exciting. But what's even more exciting is the idea of not only detecting targets, but also shooting down expensive Russian missiles with some cheap ammunition. For example, a modern 155mm projectile, which costs several times less than the cheapest cruise missile. Is it possible? Yes. The United States is currently looking for contractors to develop a system under the Multi-Domain Artillery Cannon MDAC program. This system should strengthen existing anti-aircraft artillery and offer an effective and cheap alternative to traditional anti-aircraft missile systems. It is a highly mobile, self-propelled artillery system on a wheeled chassis with a 155mm caliber, something like the French Caesar. But why reinvent the wheel if such a system already exists and can be purchased for dollars, which the Pentagon has as much as $886 billion at its disposal? The main feature of the MDAC is the Hypersonic Anti-Aircraft Munition, HVP, developed by BAE Systems. It can be purely kinetic or carry up to 900 grams of explosives. A jet engine accelerates the HPV to a hypersonic speed of Mach 5. The maximum range is 50 miles. During the test, the HVP projectile hit a BQM-167 Skeeter cruise missile. But the main thing is that the shot was fired from the American self-propelled howitzer Paladin, which is already being supplied to Ukraine. That is, Ukrainians do not even need to deploy a separate infrastructure to use HVP. But the main thing is the price. The cost of the HVP is $86,000, compared to the price of Russian missiles. Yes, this is an excellent example of an asymmetric response, which we've already seen in this war when Ukrainians used maritime drones to create parity in the Black Sea and effectively excluded the Russian Black Sea Fleet from the game. But this balance can be turned into an advantage. How? Manta Ray from Northrop Grumman. Usually, underwater vehicles have a cigar-shaped shape because it is better than others to withstand enormous pressure at depth. But Northrop Grumman chose an extraordinary way, as in the case of its iconic B-2 Spirit bomber. The result is the fantastic manta ray underwater apparatus, reminiscent of animals from the underwater kingdom. The manta ray is an ultra-large unmanned underwater vehicle, UUV, 43 to 45 feet wide and about 33 feet long. Kyle Werner, who was involved in the manta ray program, said that this UUV demonstrates unique capabilities. However, he didn't disclose all the technical details. After all, this is a military development. It is known that the manta ray is a reconnaissance apparatus that moves due to the unique shape of the hull. Rumor has it that even the pizza in the Northrop Grumman corporate canteen is shaped like a flying wing. But the movement is not its advantage. It is capable of lying on the seabed for weeks or even months and conducting hydroacoustic surveillance. Roughly speaking, the manta ray UUV records noises for 150 miles around without emitting a single decibel. The main advantage of the passive monitoring method is secrecy. The monitored objects are not even aware that they are being followed. Periodically, manta ray wakes up to send these recordings via satellite to specialists who identify the detected objects by the nature of the noise. After all, every ship in the world has a personalized acoustic profile. Another feature of the manta ray UUV is its collapsible design. The entire kit is contained in several standard containers. Thanks to this method of transportation, the manta ray can go unnoticed anywhere in the world, for example, in Ukraine. Even a single manta ray can turn the game around in the Black Sea, providing the exact coordinates of Russian ships to Ukrainian defenders. These vessels can be attacked either with missiles, unmanned surface vehicles, which Ukraine has in service, or with the help of other unmanned underwater vehicles. Ukraine is currently developing a series of underwater drones as part of the Fury project, the first Ukrainian robotic navy. We expect them to appear on the battlefield, and our viewers will be among the first to know. In general, despite the brutal nature of the war in Ukraine, which is often compared to the First World War, drones are the kings of the battlefield. Ukraine is a drone hypermarket. However, one type of UAV is still missing: fighter drones that can carry air-to-air missiles. You know, there are already a lot of reusable attack drones in the world, but massive UAVs that could carry air-to-air missiles? There are only two: the American General Atomics MQ-9 Reaper and the Turkish Bayraktar Akinci, and they are not represented on the battlefield in Ukraine. However, we will focus on the MQ-9 Reaper because more than 300 units have been built, and they have already participated in air duels. The MQ-9 Reaper can reach speeds of up to 300 miles per hour in the air and climb to an altitude of 50,000 feet. Of course, these are peak loads, but the cruising speed of almost 200 miles per hour and the operating altitude of 25,000 feet are also impressive. But what is most amazing is that the MQ-9 Reaper is capable of carrying Brimstone, Stinger, or AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles, so it can pose an asymmetric threat to Russian fighters, UAVs, and helicopters. By the way, the MQ-9, armed with an air-to-air missile, is the first UAV in history to successfully shoot down another UAV. This capability would be handy for Ukrainian air defense, which is constantly repelling attacks by Russian kamikaze UAVs. The MQ-9 is also used for reconnaissance, as it can cover 6,000 miles and stay in the air for more than 40 hours. The MQ-9 is also used in strike missions, as it is capable of carrying 5,500 pounds of bombs and air-to-ground missiles. The MQ-9 is a true multi-purpose soldier that can make a difference in the war. However, the Pentagon has not yet decided to give the green light for its transfer, so it remains exotic for Ukrainians. At the same time, more than a dozen countries operate MQ-9s. However, the weapon you see is more exotic than anything else in this video. This is a Japanese railgun. Japan hopes to use this technology on land and sea against hypersonic missiles. The Japanese gun can fire 40mm steel rounds weighing 0.7 pounds. The operator can adjust the amount of electricity consumed to change the projectile's range and speed. Many countries are trying to master the electromagnetic gun technology. For example, due to financial and technological limitations, the US Navy canceled its 15-year project to develop a railgun. And France and Germany continue to develop an electromagnetic railgun that can fire at a distance of 124 miles, and accelerate a projectile up to 6,700 miles per hour. But so far, Japan is the only country that has placed a big bet on this weapon. Japan feels threatened by North Korea's missile arsenal. That's why we paid attention to the Japanese super cannon. Ukraine is the first country in the world to experience the power of hypersonic weapons. Can railguns take hypersonic missiles out of the game? Share your thoughts in the comments.